This hot, this the spot. There it is, pod.com. We're interviewing the best comedians, so tune in quick and get your ears receiving them. We talking about life and laughter, stream right to you from the microphone right to your home, dude. Side note, this might get embarrassing, but no, don't sweat, yo, cause there it is.
Welcome to the There It Is podcast, a podcast for comedy creators of any ilk. I'm your host, Jason Farr. Let's do this. I hope you're having a great day. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast, especially if this is your first time listening. I do appreciate it. Why don't you go to thereitispod.com and find old blogs and old episodes. You can listen to us on iTunes or SoundCloud. And please do leave a review and subscribe to the podcast. Really love last week's episode. Really love today's episode. It's with Mark Kendall from Atlanta. He performs a one-man show called Magic Negro and Other Blackness, as well as a couple of other things that he's put together. He's really fantastic, and that's why I had him on. He may not be the name of other guests that I've had on, but he's doing something really great, and I think he is somebody to watch. We talk about his history in the world of improv and performance. He's got a lot of interesting, fun things that have gone on in his life. And we talk about how you can create your own one-person show. It is a very great talk. Here it is, my chat with Mark Kendall. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Where did you get your start in doing any sort of performance work?
So I guess started doing comedy in college.
Mm-hmm.
I was a film major at Northwestern University, and I joined, my freshman year, I joined a sketch group. Northwestern had a student group called Northwestern Sketch Television, and basically it was like a group of film students and theater students, and they would get together and write and, like, produce their own video sketches. And so my freshman year, I came on, like, as a crew member. So I was a crew member freshman and sophomore year, and then junior and senior year, I was a writer. And then my senior year, I appeared in one of the sketches. And then earlier in that fall, I took my first improv class because I was at the Annoyance, I was at the Annoyance Theater. But it was interesting. So that was like the first time I performed, but I wasn't really like a performer at the time per se. So it's like I went to school to like be behind the scenes. So like I had no interest in performing really.
Yeah, you wanted to create stuff, but you didn't want to be on camera.
Totally. And so, but then the summer after my junior year, I did this internship with Comedy Central. It was called like Chris Rock Summer School. So Chris Rock, he set up this thing over at Comedy Central that was for minority writers or writers of color in college specifically to come and spend like a summer at Comedy Central in New York. And so what you would do is you would rotate through different departments, seeing what it was like to be a writer in different positions or like having writer-related jobs. So it's like you'd spend a couple weeks in their like, you know, their online department. So you'd like work on different blogs that they had going. Or you would spend a couple weeks like an on-off-air promotion. So the people that would write like the little quick commercials that you see for Comedy Central in between their shows. We spent like a couple weeks in development. But the best part was I got to spend a week with the writing staff of The Daily Show, and I got to spend a week with the writing staff of The Colbert Report. And not like interning, though. Like I just kind of got to shadow them.
Yeah, and that's really cool.
And so like I would sit in on all the meetings that they had, and they would also like give me like personal assignments. So they're like, okay, so like these are things that we would write for the show, you know, so go off and write these things. And then occasionally like I'd get to like pitch jokes to them as well. And so it was like really cool.
Did you get anything on air?
I did. I got one line on the Colbert Report. So like the opening, he had like that opening segment where he's just like tonight, and then he has like 3 lines.
Right.
And then like one final punchline, and he's like, this is the Colbert Report. And so I pitched something in a version of it wound up in one of the shows which is like for every action, I have a superior and opposite reaction or something to the Colbert Report or something like that.
Yeah.
And so that was cool. And like, and they were very supportive, you know what I'm saying? So it's just like, I mean, so they like tweaked it to make it something that they could use, you know what I'm saying?
That's so cool though.
Yeah, no, it was a great experience. And the Colbert Report in particular was really cool. Well, both of them were really great, but the thing that I found was that so many of the writers on both of those staffs were performers. And so, and then being in New York that summer, and they put us up like in these NYU dorms. So we were right in the Village. So it was just so easy just to like walk to open mics, like for stand up. So many of like the Daily Show writers in particular, and a lot of the people that I would meet, either other, they call us rock turns. So like other rock turns that I would meet were also like dabbled in stand up or were getting into it, or people that worked in these different departments were comedians of some kind. So I was like, oh, so this is just like a natural extension of writing. So it's like, so there wasn't even really like any pressure attached to it. I was like, oh, I don't even really want to perform, but I want to figure out if these jokes work.
Right.
So I started going up and to open mics, just telling these jokes, and it was fun, you know. So like that summer, like I kind of started doing stand-up, and then the week that I was at the Colbert Report in particular, I guess, you know, because Stephen, having been from the Chicago improv scene, and his head writer was from that scene, and a bunch of people like high up in the creative team were from that Chicago improv scene. There was like a really heavy improv community feeling. So it's just like, when I would pitch an idea and the way that they would make it better, you know what I'm saying, and be like, oh, good job. You know, there was no reason for them to do that for me, you know what I'm saying? Like, but it was sort of like that improv spirit that I really gravitated towards, and I learned that a lot of them did improv in Chicago. And so since I was like, Northwestern's in a suburb of Chicago, so it's just a train ride to get into the city to take an improv class. So anyway, that fall, when I came back from my senior year of school, I took my first improv class. Even still then, it wasn't even really like, oh, performing something that like I want to spend a lot of time doing. It was just like, this is a way to get better at writing. So
right.
It's like if you can hear how the audience responds to things, if you can hear how words actually have to be said on stage, it just improves your writing. And I felt like it did. I feel like a lot of times, at least beforehand, when I would write a lot, you know, you write things out so that they read well. So like if you hand a script to someone and they read that script, it reads really well. And that's a useful skill for sure.
Yeah.
But if you're like in a sketch group, or, you know what I'm saying, you're like handing something off to someone that's then going to go get read out loud, you know, you want it
to sound good. Yeah.
Yeah,
that was why I got into comedy. I got into comedy because I wanted to be a better writer, and I was reading a book that said to do stand-up if you want to get better at writing, and or want a job writing for a show. And they said do stand-up because that's what they all do. And this person who wrote this book is more of a stand-up person, so they didn't mention anything about improv, but
sure.
I went into comedy. You have the way cooler version of that story, but that's the same. The same reason why I went into it. So you went to the Annoyance Theater for your first class.
Yeah. And I liked it a lot. It was sort of like an isolated class, meaning like I took that first level one, and it was my senior year. And because I was kind of busy with a bunch of film stuff back in Evanston, I didn't take like an improv class like immediately after that, you know, because I was already kind of like involved in comedy groups, primarily like as a writer at school anyway, and being a film student, most of the free time I had that senior year was spent working on film. So I was able to get that like little improv class in there, and I didn't really revisit it, improv specifically anyway, like that much in college. But after I finished school, I moved back to Atlanta, which is where I'm from originally. And I started pretty soon getting involved with like Dad's Garage Theater Company, which is one of the theaters here in Atlanta. It's a really great place, and so I started like interning there to get free classes, and so that ended up being like my more like, I guess, like formal or more regular introduction into like learning how to perform comedy, and so most of that kind of started after college. So. And the reason for that, I suppose, is that like, you know, in Chicago and Evanston, where I was in school, there were a ton of sketch groups, and so like sketch comedy was a big thing in Chicago. So, if you didn't want to perform, it was easy to just be a writer,
Right.
And then when I moved to Atlanta, while the comedy scene has grown a lot since I've moved back, and so there's a bunch of things going on now. When I moved back to Atlanta, sketch was mostly non-existent.
Right.
There was stand-up and then there was improv. So it's just like.
And how long ago did you say that was?
Like 2009. I moved back to Atlanta in 2009, towards the end of 2009, 2010. And so when I moved back, it was just like, if you wanted to like do any kind of comedy, which I did, it's like you kind of had to start performing. So that's kind of why it pushed me further into the improv realm.
Yeah, that's great. And it shows. It shows in your work.
Thanks.
You've been doing improv and other performance since 2009, essentially, and at least in the Southeast. You did, of course, a little bit before that, as you mentioned. But what else are you doing, or what do you do during the day? Are you doing anything in the film industry or anything?
A little bit. So I've had like little short jobs in the industry, not quite as much. So it's just like, it's interesting. Like, I studied film most of my time. As I've spent more and more time with improv, has been spent more on stage stuff. But when I moved back to Atlanta, I started working as a casting assistant at Tyler Perry Studios, which was a very interesting experience. So I was there, but it was a brief time. And then after that, I started interning at Dad's Garage, and then I started taking like little side gigs to make time to do improv and comedy at night. And so now I spend like a lot of time like, teaching or doing gigs, and occasionally like I'll have like a little side gig or whatever, but most of the gigs or jobs I take are kind of like in the stage realm. And then occasionally, because there is a decent amount of like random film or media stuff to do in Georgia now, I do a little bit of that. So.
Oh, cool. You said that the experience at the Tyler Perry Studios was interesting. What went on there?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because I haven't spent time on like a ton of television shows or anything, but it's interesting going from like, because just the year before I'd spent a little bit of time like at the Daily Show and the Colbert Report, and they do their staff, their each respective staff, so like the Daily Show and the Colbert Report, at least when I was there, they turn out like 4 episodes of television a week, and that's like a late night show, like a desk, maybe a couple desks, or maybe a couple guests, and then like, some jokes, like they would do like 4 episodes a week, and that was like a ton. And then I went to Tyler Perry Studios, and at the time they had Meet the Browns running and House of Pain, and they had some departments where it was like, oh, this is the House of Pain department, and this is the Meet the Browns department. But certain departments like casting, for example, which was the department I was part of, they were doing both shows. And so we would be doing Meet the Browns and House of Pain at the same time, shooting sometimes like 4 episodes a week of both shows.
Oh, wow.
And so it's like a sitcom. It's kind of unheard of because like he kind of created this new way of like shooting episodes really, really fast.
Right.
And so witnessing that was just kind of like, wow. And then on occasion, like he might have like a movie in a certain stage of development at the same time too.
Right.
And so for all this to be happening in Atlanta on top of all that was just kind of like an interesting thing to watch.
It was. Yeah. He signed before he even showed one episode. Tyler Perry signed like 100-episode deal with TBS. So they just started pumping them out.
Yeah. Yeah. And just kind of seeing what it takes to pump something out that quick was just interesting because it's like, like an FX show, you know what I'm saying? Like might do like 10 episodes a year, or like a British show might do like 6 episodes a year. So like seeing them do, like dozens of episodes in the span of like 3 or 4 months was kind of interesting because you kind of see like, all right, so this is what it takes to make this, and this is what it, or I mean, and not that I haven't been on like too many other shows, but it was just sort of interesting seeing like the sacrifices you make or the benefits of like going so much faster, basically. Right.
That's unreal.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. And And it was also kind of interesting too because this was like 2009 or so I was still pretty new to performance. But it was great to watch because I just watched so many auditions,
Right.
and it was cool just like watching that because it's just like I learned so many useful things about being a performer, which was like so many times like if you do or do not get a role, it has like just nothing to do with you. Like I watched it so many times where it was just like from my perspective or from someone else's perspective. And this isn't just like this show. I mean, I feel like this is pretty much any situation.
This is anything. Yeah. So much of it is just, oh, you know what? They remind me too much of someone who's not who I envisioned for this role.
Yeah. I mean, they're just like, I just witnessed so many things that were out of the performer's control, basically.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's just like, oh, that was kind of like a relief. Like it was just like, oh, okay. I think that was like a big takeaway from it.
That is a really good takeaway to have because you're going to hear no more than you hear yes if you're an actor and trying to get film roles or TV roles. And a lot of it really does just come down to they have a very particular thing that they envisioned that they're married to. And you may not fit that, and that doesn't mean that you're a bad actor or that you ruined yourself during the the audition. It just means you didn't fit that specific thing they had in their mind. Wrong or right that they had it in their mind. That was what was in their mind.
Yeah.
I first saw you at the Charleston Comedy Festival at the beginning of this year, and that was where we all here in Greenville saw you. And immediately we were like, who is this guy? He's amazing. Because and the thing is, not only were you good, but you were good in a jam. That's where we saw you. We didn't see your solo show yet, which I do want to talk about.
Gotcha.
But we saw you in the jam and didn't know what to expect from you because you were standing on stage and you were wearing a jacket and, and you're wearing like, you may have been wearing like a toboggan or something. And so we were like, what's that guy with this jacket? Like, who is this guy who's wearing a jacket on stage? It's so cumbersome. And then just out of nowhere, you just crushed. And it's not easy to do well. I don't know how many listeners do improv, but it's not easy to do well in a jam because you're performing with people you've not performed with or you don't know that well. And so you don't really know their nuances of playing style. You seem to have a really clear perspective of how you approach a scene or a very clear method. Is that true?
I think so. Or at least I try to. Maybe it's part of like the annoyance thing, like taking the annoyance class because or at least what I took away from it was they're really big on scene starts and just like having your own point of view. So I think that type of style perhaps lends itself to like a jam type setting. Where it's just like, well, no matter what everybody else is doing, you may not necessarily be even comfortable with what everybody else is doing. But if you have your own thing kind of going on, you can at least contribute that.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I think that is a good lesson to learn. I know some people talk about Mick Napier, who started Annoyance Theater. In his book, he says, take care of yourself first, which some people don't like that language because it sounds like don't be concerned with taking care of your scene partner to some people. That's how they read it. But I do get the perspective of have something that you were doing at the beginning of a scene, like have a perspective, have be a particular type of person. Having that at the top of a scene certainly does make that character seem like it's more formed than a lot of scenes. A lot of characters look at the beginning of an improv scene. And I think we picked that up from you. I think that's what we're picking up on. So I'm not surprised to hear that. I feel like I'm still trying to figure out my method of approaching starting a scene. So, yes, scene starts is a big thing.
Yeah.
And when did you start doing your one-man show?
I guess about 2 years ago. The cool thing about Dad's Garage is that in addition to being like an improv theater where we put on improv shows every weekend, it's also like a straight-up theater company. So like every year they produce like a season's worth of scripted content and plays. But a lot of time, but the plays are cast by or are filled with improvisers.
Right.
So you go and see, and it's kind of cool because it's just like you get to go see these scripted plays where the people playing with each other are comedians and they're used to playing with each other versus like, a collection of casts that is like, where a bunch of people audition, you throw together a cast, you try to get them to gel.
Right.
The cool thing is it's like they're all already kind of gelled and they're trying to like adapt to the material.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it's a cool thing. And then in addition to that, most of the stuff that we've been doing over the past couple of years has been like original stuff written by our improvisers. So so each year, for the next year, for the next 2 years or whatever, you can pitch scripted content. So it's like you can be like, oh, I have this play that I want to do, and then there's kind of like a pitching, voting process, and then that's how we decide what stuff we produce the following year. And so, back in, I guess maybe 2014 or something like that, I pitched my solo show, and then I did it later that fall at Dad's Garage. And so that was kind of like the first time that I did it. And then since then, it's been through like sort of like several iterations. But I guess the short, it's kind of like a long answer, but 2014.
Oh no, that's awesome. No, that's I wanted all that information.
Cool.
What made you want to start doing it? What made you say, I should do a solo show?
Yeah. Well, I've always really liked sketch, and that's kind of where comedically, like I started back in college. And so when I moved to Atlanta and there wasn't as much sketch, I kind of went down the improv rabbit hole for a while, but I always really wanted to get back to that whole sketch comedy feel. And so once I had been at Dad long enough and I had the opportunity to pitch something, I was just like, oh, maybe I could do a solo show because a couple other people at Dad's have done solo shows in the past. And so like one show that was like pretty cool for me to see was Amber Nash, who's a performer at our theater.
Yeah, she's on the next episode.
Oh, fantastic! Oh,
Yeah.
That's so great. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, she's the best. So,
She is.
so she did a solo show at Dad's Garage that was great. And in preparation for that, she got a bunch of Dad's Garage improvisers together to take a solo performance class with her. So it's just like, so there's this really great professor at UGA that specializes like in solo performance, and George Contini is his name, and so he would come down to Amber's place, and we'd all just kind of crowd into her apartment and like learn about solo performance from this guy, and he'd like show us clips. So I watched like Don Leguizamo's stuff, and then like a couple other people's stuff, and like he kind of take us through exercises and kind of gave us some really interesting pointers to get us started on the path to putting together what was needed to make a solo show. So asking really like good questions is helpful to at least, even if you don't have the answers, to like trying to think about if you're going to try to put together like a longer piece for yourself. So like, who's your audience? Like who you're talking to, or like in the show, who are you talking to? Like in a sentence, what is your show really about? Like if you can answer those things, it'll make a much more focused like effort. And so, so I took that class, and that was like really good framework. And, in college, kind of going back, like why I wanted to do the show that I did in college, I was studying filmmaking, and I was, I still am like really passionate about like storytelling, as well as visual storytelling. And I loved my time at Northwestern Film University. But during my 4 years there, I was like the only black guy in my class. And there's one other black woman that transferred in sophomore year, but she wasn't as actively involved, in the making of films and things like that. And there were like maybe a handful of black people a couple of years above or below, but generally like in my classes, I'd be the only black person. And and same with the professors, it was just like a very white environment, which I'm used to and everything. But when it comes to film, it's really interesting because it's like if you look at most of the, significant like American films that have come out in our time, the way that black people are depicted or intentionally like left out says a lot about race in our country,
right.
but it's just like it was never touched on in the classes, you know. So it's like, so it's like you'd watch a clip of Birth of a Nation, and the teacher might say something about like this might be a little rough, but it's like look at the editing, you know. It was just like it was a weird experience,
right?
But then at the same time, I'd be taking classes in the African American Studies department and learned a bunch of really interesting things about like perspective and like, you know, who's telling the story and how does that influence how people are depicted, you know, what are the effects of these images, you know, got me thinking on a lot of that stuff, and I found it really interesting as someone that wanted to make this stuff and enjoyed watching it. And so especially kind of like the thing that was really interesting to me was it's like it's not just, you know, how many people of color or how many whatever are in the film. What's sometimes like an even bigger thing is like who's the person making it, you know, how do they write it, you know, like the person shooting it, the person that lights it, the person that costumes these people. All those decisions, you know, make a difference. You know, all those decisions like influence how, like, you know, if people's humanity, I guess, is like properly reflected. And so that's something that's always kind of like been a big thing with me. And then also like in Atlanta in the improv scene, while like big improvements have been made, at least like when I started doing improv, it was a similar thing where there was like and still now, like, you know, despite, you know, efforts being made, there's still like a general lack of diversity to the point where it's just like when I do improv personally, like I don't really bring up issues of race too much, too often. But that's like a big part of like what I think about. It's a big part of like creatively what I'm interested in. And so solo performance in particular offered this unique opportunity for me to kind of like say these things that I didn't really previously feel like I had the medium to do. Even being at Northwestern, you know, it was kind of the same thing, you know, like with extracurriculars. So the sketch group that I was a part of, for example, like there was a weird moment when I first joined the writing staff. I was really excited. I was a junior, and I was like finally able to like write these sketches for the sketch group that I had been a part of for a while. And like, you know, just cause I think there may have been one black guy in the cast, but not really, you know, like, and so I'd write all these sketches with all these what were intended to be black characters, but that would be impossible to film, you know.
Right, because there are a bunch of white guys in there, right.
Yeah, and so I was just like, which I totally get. I mean, it's like, you can't write for people that are
It's not it's not a complaint about it. It's just saying this is what the circumstance is oftentimes.
Yeah, and so it was really weird. And actually what was funny is my senior year, I was like, and so I sort of like started to curtail the way that I write at the time. And then my senior year, there was it was a student in the group. Their dad is like a very successful you know, sitcom writer, and came to, you know, be a mentor of sorts, and like just hear our pitches and like hear the sketches that we were doing. And one of the sketches that I wrote was about a person basically that had been incarcerated, you know, and it wasn't meant to be a take on race. It was like, oh, this person should be played by a black person. And they said, like, we don't have any black people in the cast. And so that's how I ended up playing it. Like, I was not angling for it or anything like that.
Right.
But then that sketch, though, ended up going over really well, you know, like people really liked it. And so that's why I was like, oh, maybe I could kind of do this thing. So anyway, like fast forwarding to 2014 or whatever, I guess the reason for wanting to do the solo show is just kind of like, this way I can kind of like say what I want to say. It's not like I have to worry about like the demographics of the other people that I'm working with, you know.
Right, you can do
like, it. Yeah, I can just kind of do it. So it was mostly like, it's like, oh, this is the thing that I'm really interested in talking about. And then out of necessity, the easiest way to probably execute it would be if it was like a solo performance. And so since I had been taking a solo performance class with Amber, you know, that's kind of what led to it.
Just all came together, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why the name of the show is The Magic Negro and Other Blackness, because you had a bunch of sketches that you'd written about a black experience that only you could play.
Yeah.
What has been the response to that? You've been doing it for a while now. What has been the feedback? Have you had any sort of odd situations with feedback, or great situations with feedback?
Yeah, I feel like it's been not too many surprises. I think the main thing that affects how any given audience will react, I think, is either what is perhaps happening in the news at that particular time.
Right.
So, like, there have been times when I've been performing the show, like, smack dab in the middle of some, like, crazy stuff going on, and then other times when things are, like, a little bit more mellow. So that might affect, like, how an audience, like, walks into the theater. The other thing that maybe affects it is sometimes I'll do shows and I will be, like at a, sometimes at a festival, sometimes people may not come to see you specifically. They may not know you're on the bill. So they just, like, show up to see a show.
Right, and they're reading the bill, and it's just kind of like, improv group name, silly improv group name, Magic Negro. Right. And
Yeah. And so, like, it may be like an afterthought, and so it may take them a couple of minutes to figure out, like, what they've gotten themselves into. But generally speaking, because the title, I think, is fairly clear, most of the time people kind of know what they're getting into.
Right.
I think the only thing that will affect things sometimes is just, like, like where people will laugh, for example, is just, like, the makeup of the audience itself. So,
right.
So I was in Canada this summer, in Edmonton in particular, for the Edmonton Fringe Festival, which is an awesome experience, which is like this, like, their Fringe Festival is the biggest one in North America, so you got, like, hundreds of shows that come into Edmonton for, like, 10 days or whatever, and you get a run of, like, 6 or 7 shows over the course of these 10 days, and the community comes and sees your stuff at all these venues around town. It's crazy. And but Edmonton, doesn't have, like, any African-American people. I mean, there's some Caribbean, African, but not, I mean, obviously, like, not that many, like, African-American people that were, like, in the United States and then for whatever reason happened to be in Edmonton in the summer seeing a show. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe I met, like, one during the whole time there that came to see the show, which isn't surprising or anything. But
right.
I guess what I'm saying is that it's just like they laugh. They would laugh during the show, but then there's certain times that they would be uncomfortable. But occasionally, like, a black person in the audience will come after the show and tell me, "Hey, man, I really thought this part was funny. I didn't laugh because everybody else was uncomfortable, but I really enjoyed the joke." And then, but then, for example, like, I was in Detroit a couple months ago, and it's like those moments were kind of flipped because for whatever reason, that particular show, the demographics were, it was like there are more black people in the audience than white people.
Right.
And so that is something that can change like, how people receive it. I did do one show, like, it was a workshop performance, and I, like, handed out feedback cards and got them back. And for the most part, people are responding either with laughter or discomfort in mostly the same places. But I haven't, unless I've just, like, blocked it out of my mind, I haven't really had anything, like, too crazy, too unusual.
Right. Yeah, it's the uncomfortable thing that I was imagining would happen. And, people get uncomfortable about certain things. It's Yeah,
I think the worst that's happened is, like, maybe sometimes someone might walk out, but you never really know why someone's walking out, So
yeah, that's
like,
true. There's always the immediate assumption that it's for a negative reason, but it could just be, the babysitter called, I have to go.
Yeah. So it's just like, so that has happened, again, never really knowing why. Once, like, a couple months ago, I was in a suburb of Georgia, so not really Atlanta. Atlanta's, like, a fairly, like, diverse city, lots of things going on, but you go further out from the city, it changes a little bit. And so I was doing a performance in one of the suburbs, and there's a moment where, like, I do a bit where I intentionally try to do something that's not funny, and that's kind of the joke. And so I shout cookies a bunch of times at the audience, and I try to set up why I am doing it. There's, like, a clear reason why I'm doing it. It's not just to mess with them. But one of the audience members, for whatever reason, didn't get it. And so, like, as I was doing this, I could hear them very clearly just saying, like, "Stop it, stop," which I have never really had that reaction before. I was just like, the whole point of this bit that I told you is that I'm not going to stop doing it. So,
that really triggered their aversion to it.
Yeah. It gave him once in the first show that I did during the Edmonton Fringe Festival, there's some like cultural differences where it's like I say something or I do something, it may not necessarily read the same to an Edmonton crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the running order that I picked for the first show wasn't the best fit. So so the running order I did for the first show, I switched up for the rest of the run. And I remember after the first show, I went off stage and I was just backstage and I could hear people talking as they were leaving. And one person just went, "Well, that was uncomfortable." It's like not in a good way.
Yeah.
Like they were not a fan. I should also say though, that being said, in that same show, the people that came up to me and so they really enjoyed it. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's just like nothing too crazy in terms of like what people.
This is whether people
like
are willing to
show.
listen to it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that really is the reason people are uncomfortable about things and will say something like, "Oh, I think it was too much into the race stuff." It's just because they didn't want to hear it because it's uncomfortable for them to know. Like I've had a joke when I told a joke recently that was about the racism that has happened since the election, and first time I told it did really well, and I think it was because the crowd was just warm to it, and I knew a lot of them, and they really enjoyed the joke and thought it was a solid joke. But then I did it somewhere else, and the people just didn't want to have to hear any more about the election, or the aftermath, and so they just were not comfortable hearing about what's been going on. But it's hard to know because. I'm not one of those people that says like, "Oh, punch up to power," but I do think that art in general brings people together because it says, "Hey, here's my perspective, and now you know my perspective." And when we stop being willing to listen to other people's perspective, that's when we're going to be in a really bad place. I think we kind of are in that place, but I mean, comedy is the sugar that helps the medicine go down.
Yeah.
And that medicine is hear my perspective, hear where I am coming from. That's I think what I really love about comedy is that we can always say, here's my perspective to people. Let me just give it to you in a way that makes it easier for you to stomach it.
Right. Agreed. Mm-hmm.
But you also do teach you because I took a workshop of yours about a solo. Yeah. Do you do primarily how to do a solo show workshop, or do you do any other
mostly like I'll teach like sketch writing, like I teach and coach improv. I'll do corporate gigs, so like team building gigs. So just kind of like an assortment of stuff. But I think like what I end up teaching the most tends to be either like sketch writing or improv related stuff.
Right. How's that experience been for you?
It's okay. It's pretty good. Like I'm always trying to figure out better ways to teach. I think the main thing is just like trying to get better at understanding like where a particular person is coming from in that class.
Yeah, that's like, where I'm struggling with as a coach, and every once in a while I've taught a couple of things, and I'm in that same boat. How do you deal with that aspect of someone just not getting what you're saying or whatever?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's kind of like I try to think about like, why is this person taking this class or in this workshop or whatever it is. Sometimes maybe you're teaching, or my experience is sometimes like you're teaching someone a little bit more experienced, maybe that knows you or something. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times the reason they take the class is they just kind of want to understand your process. So it's like, I'm trying to see, is there anything that I can like kind of take away from this and apply to this like next show I got to do like right now,
right.
And so I think that they kind of want like a more direct, you can kind of like talk a little bit more as yourself about like experiences that you have like with your performance. Almost kind of like a more advanced kind of approach to it. Mm-hmm. But then other times, like you'll be teaching a writing class or an improv class, people don't want to be performers, don't want to be writers. They're just trying to get more acclimated to it or do it as a hobby, or maybe they're like really nervous about trying it.
Right.
And so in those instances, I try to be more of like a source of support for them, and encouragement. and it's a little different than like, you know, they don't really need like real serious critique. They need like, keep going, you know.
Right.
Whereas like other people are kind of like, not even necessarily looking for critique, but it's like, what do you see? What would you suggest to really get better?
Right.
So I feel like it's kind of like, well, where is this person coming from? And so I try to gauge that by when I first meet students, like on the first day of class or whatever, just trying to get a sense of like, you know, what's your relationship with comedy? What are you trying to get out of this workshop? You know, do you do this often? And a lot of times in that they'll kind of reveal where they're coming from most of the time, you know. So that's kind of my approach to it.
That's a good approach. Do you coach any teams?
I'm not currently coaching teams, but I've coached several teams. So sometimes, like, I'll be coaching several. Currently, like, I'm not actually coaching anyone. But I enjoy that the most, actually.
Coaching is fun. Yeah, I enjoy coaching, too. It does come with its pros and cons, obviously.
Right.
You know, with a class or a workshop, you can say one basic thing and you just hammer that home and then you wave them goodbye. But with a coach, you know, it's you're with them for a season, you're with them for a period of time, and you want to make sure that they have all the things that they need at their disposal. And that's where it can get kind of hairy to know how to get them in the right spot or get them in the right place. Because you're not necessarily sure what sort of common goal you can create. I mean, if I'm a basketball coach, then I'm trying to have a winning season and get to the championship game. But what is the championship game for an improv team? That's the struggle. That's a great question, great point. Like, and I feel like sometimes too, it's like and this is just me. I don't know what you think. Like with certain improv teams, I feel like sometimes you watch where they're at and kind of be like, oh man, they could get to this level, you know? Right. I do that.
And as a coach, I guess it's like trying to do everything that you can to try to get them to that next, you know, tier that they definitely have the ability to
right.
reach.
And when they don't think they have that ability, or they don't know what you mean or what that next tier is, or they don't realize what tier they're on, that's where it gets real complicated to try to figure out.
It is. It's tough with improv, or at least in Atlanta sometimes, because it's like most of the time when I coach teams, it's for like long form. But in Atlanta, most of the improv that gets performed on the weekends. Maybe not anymore. I guess it's kind of changed. But even still, I would say it's tough to be like, oh, this is where you can go see a Herald. It's kind of tough to do that in Atlanta. So I guess what I don't know, like it is kind of challenging. I find myself like trying to show like tapes of stuff to people, or like I was trying to recommend for them, like if they can, you know, like go to a festival, or like if a festival's in town, try and check that out. But yeah, I agree, this is challenging.
Yeah. Well, this seems like a good spot to end and move on to the creating something together process. What could we create together?
Oh, man, I'm open to anything. Not quite sure, but I'm open to anything.
Well, maybe if I were going to create a one-man show. Like
great,
what could I do? So you came through it based on things you had written because of your perspective and things that were on your mind a lot, and brought them all together over time because you couldn't do them before. But is there any sort of, when you say I'm going to do this show, this solo show, were there a bunch of different ideas you had, or did you kind of know immediately what you wanted to do?
I knew I wanted to deal with representation of Black men in media. So, like, even though it's kind of like a wide net, like I knew that I also intentionally wanted to like cast a wide net, but that was something in particular that I knew I was interested in. But the way that I would approach it, I wasn't precisely sure. So that's a big reason why that class, for example, was helpful. But also I'm fortunate in that, like, being a part of like the Dad's Garage community, there are tons of other people making stuff all the time that have really great taste. So it's easy to pick other people's brains and be like, these are ideas that I have. Does this make sense to you? And they'll either be like yes or no, you know. And that's super helpful.
You say it's casting a wide net, but it's maybe not too broad. I mean, the thing that would come to my mind immediately would be, if I were going to do a solo show, is thinking about what connects us all. That might be a little too wide. I might need to refine that a little bit, wouldn't I?
Well, I guess like maybe if you already have an answer in your head of like what connects us all, you know? So it's just like if you maybe thought about the ways that you think, if you thought about the things that actually connect us all, and whatever that list is for you, maybe that provides the focus.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
Or it's just like, or maybe if you frame that question in the form of an answer, you know, that
like what connects us all.
Yeah, if you just answer that in the form of a sentence or a couple sentences, maybe that could potentially provide.
Okay.
Focus to it. You know.
And then when you're trying to really bring it all together with like a name, how do you? Because you mentioned earlier that the name of the show, Magic Negro and Other Blackness, kind of that name alone lets people know what they're in for. How did you craft that name?
Actually, it was during a brainstorming session with a friend of mine, and then well, it was a couple things. Well, I knew that I wanted to have the Magic Negro in the title, and so that came from brainstorming with another friend of mine. And then I think And Other Blackness was like an off-the-cuff sort of thing.
It's such a great name because there was a lot of talk at one point, too, about how a lot of the depiction of African-American males was that they were magic, you know, like Legend of Bagger Vance and all these kind of things where it was if a black guy got a big role, it was because he was this magical Negro who could come in, had all this wisdom, which I'm sure came from a good place in people's hearts too, of just like, hey, you know how, you know, black people are so nice and helpful. Then it ends up being reduced to too little of a trope. Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good to sort of process on and try to figure out how to structure a show. Are there any other sort of things that you went through or processes you went through to?
Yeah. Something that I think was really helpful for me, I think, was during the process of writing the show, I just journal a lot. So it's just like it helped with the writing process, where it was just like every morning, just like write 3 pages and like maybe
on the specific subject or just about anything.
Generally about anything, but making sure that I did give thought to the show. So it's just like another thing that was really useful as I got sketches accumulated, I would like write them on index cards and then like post them up on a wall and just just constantly think about the running order of the show. And so I think like just journaling about it, always having it up on the wall, it just kind of like gets in your brain a little bit. So you're kind of always thinking about it. I think picking something like the subject you mentioned, you know, sounds like you're passionate about it. I think that that's important. Just something that you could just like spout off on, I think is important. Asking yourself, you know, why is it, and what is it about the show that's important to you? What do you want the audience to really take away from it? So even if you don't necessarily get those answers right away, like, you know, what are you saying in the show? Why are you saying it? Why is it important? Who are you saying it to? What do you hope they come away with? Those kind of things, I feel like it's the very least in the back of your mind. So, like, don't let it, like, at the same time, it's just, like, feel free to, like, create stuff, like, cast that wide net. But if you're then looking to come back around and focus it, those are all questions that I think are helpful.
Oh, very good questions to ask yourself.
Yeah.
When you are presenting the material, of course, you have a particular mindset of how you want people to take it. How do you handle people not taking it that way? I mean, obviously, there's so many different kinds of people out there. You can't control how everyone receives information as hard as you may try. How do you not freak out over misunderstandings?
Sure. I mean, I think I kind of do a little bit. I mean, that's part of the process, I think, is that, like, I do freak out with the reaction. So just like, I think I try new material like in little bits a lot of times. So it's just like there's shows around Atlanta that I'll do where it's just like, I don't know if this piece is a good fit. Let me just do this piece at this place and see how people react. Or like, let me show this person this script. And a lot of times, like, I missed the mark. I'm like, okay, lesson learned, you know. I think the other thing too, and this is just maybe just because I come from like a more comedic background, is that if I do something that's like kind of like pushes a button or goes kind of far or whatever, I try to make sure that it's couched in as much comedy as possible. So I try to make the show, like, I guess this is more specific to my particular show, but I try to make sure that there are as many laughs in it as possible. So it's not like I'm concerned about the show always getting laughs. Like, I don't really care about that. But I guess what I'm saying is that, like, I feel like I think about someone that disagrees with me or doesn't want to see the show. If I could get them to laugh somewhere, I feel like that's sort of like an implicit form of agreement. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, I guess that, because you're like acknowledging what I said was true, I think. So
right.
I guess what I'm saying
they at
is,
least understand it, yeah.
Yeah, something. Yeah, there's some sort of common ground.
They're
so
connecting there, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess like another thing that I try to think about is like, and I guess that's one thing that's sort of changing about the show, but for the most part, I go back and forth on it. But for the most part, I'm also trying to make the funniest show possible. But what that actually means, I guess, is changing.
Right. Yeah. Well, excellent. There it is.
Cool,
thanks
man.
for being on the podcast. Yeah, that was so great. Thanks for chatting.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate it. Yeah. It was great.
What a great chat, right? There's so much you could get from that. I thought it was a really fun talk. He's a really great dude. Really enjoyed having him on, and I hope you learned a lot. I certainly did. If you want to know more about him, you can go to his Facebook at Mark Kendall ATL, and you can keep up on what he's doing and follow him. Definitely like his page. Keep up with him. Tell him hello. Tell him I sent you. And if you are ever in Atlanta, go check out one of his shows. He also talked about Dad's Garage in there. You can check out them at dadsgarage.com. Well, I hope you join us next week. Definitely follow me on Twitter at There It Is Pod and at Jason Farr Jokes. Also like us on Facebook at There It Is Pod. Go to thereitispod.com, find out some old stuff, and join us next week. We're going to have on a very cool guest. I'll let you know about it when it happens. Until next time, be good to each other.
The music for the theme song was created by Neil Brooks. The rap was written and performed by Nick Acevedo. The logo for There It Is was created by Jeff Prater. The There It Is podcast is produced by Jason Farr.